hour just music
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much. Oh, thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Jasper Dent. I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson, Saskatoon. This event is being held on Treaty 6 territory. This is the land of the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota, and homeland of the Métis. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of Standstill, a Hopewell Earthworks Day. I really struggle with that word, Earthworks Daybook and other essays by Bruce Rice, published by Radiant Press. Joining us as host for the evening is Taidgh Lynch. Thank you so much to both Bruce and Taidgh for being here tonight and for working with us to create this event. I'd just like to note that this event is being live streamed, so there's a web camera up to your right here. That'll just be focused on the stage, not the audience. I'd also like to take this time to remind you all to silence or turn off your phones. Save yourself the embarrassment of getting a call mid-event. It happened at our last event. It's very embarrassing. Don't do it. If you'd like to buy copies of Bruce's books, we have some up here on the signing table, and we also have some on the desk by where you walked in. You're welcome to get your book signed before you purchase it. Just please remember to stop by the cash desk on your way out. Now I'd like to introduce your host for the evening. Taidgh Lynch completed an MFA in writing at the University of Saskatchewan in 2019. He's the current Grain Poetry editor. His work has appeared in Prairie Fire, Untethered Magazine, The Wax to Lemon, and elsewhere, and his chapbook First Lift Here was published with Jack Pine Press in 2019. Everyone, please give Taidgh a very warm welcome.
Hello, and hello everyone online as well. Before we begin, I just want to pause from our busy day and just to take a couple of breaths. Those of you who are with us online can join in too. So let's take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. One more deep breath in and a deep breath out. So we are grateful that you are all here on this lovely venue, McNally Robinson, to celebrate Bruce's new book. Every 18.6 years, our moon reaches the extremes of its orbit around the Earth. We observe this as the moon rises and sets at its most northerly and southerly positions on the horizon. This pause that we're currently experiencing is what's called the major lunar standstill, and what Bruce writes about in part 1 in Standstill, a Hopewell Earthworks Daybook and other essays. Bruce's essay collection gently reminds us to pause and look, to pay close attention to what is in front of us. The essays ask us to stand still with an inquiring and curious mind, examining places, experiences, stories, and art that we often overlook or take for granted. I'd like to introduce Bruce. Bruce is a previous Saskatchewan Poet Laureate, essayist, and editor. In addition to Standstill, Long Road Press nonfiction, he has published a children's book and 6 poetry collections, including the Vivian Poems, Radiant Press 2020, which you can see there. On the life and work of the street photographer Vivian Maier. Ranging from family stories, the vanishing prairie and the north, to the Statue of Liberty, art is a presence in most of his work. Bruce writes about community, reclaiming the voices of those who live on the margins, and how we are transformed by landscape, even as we leave our footprints on it. He grew up in Prince Albert and lives in Regina on Treaty 4 territory and the Métis homeland. So I want you to join me in welcoming Bruce as he reads some excerpts from his book.
Thanks. Thanks, Taidgh, and thanks to McNally Robinson. I've also spent a fair amount of time at their stores in Winnipeg as well. They've been very helpful to the writing community generally, and in addition to, thank goodness, an independent bookstore, which is so badly needed actually across this country. I am from Treaty 4 territory, which is the homeland of the Naheawak, the Lakota, Dakota people, and the Saulteaux, and also, of course, the homeland of the Métis. And so often at these events, when we do a land acknowledgement, it's almost become a bit of a form. But actually, if you had been down in the United States and seen what I saw down there visiting these sites, which are just recently received a UNESCO World Heritage designation, they were still struggling. The University of Ohio was still struggling to find wording for a land acknowledgement. And there were some things down there. There are two Americas. One's the huge intellectual culture that's really gifted the world with so much, and the other is this very troubled country. And so the visit down there was in the middle of both these experiences. So I wanted to just say that, and how much more a land acknowledgement means to me every time I hear it now after seeing what has been happening down there. And also I'm happen to have one of the people in our mentorship programs with the Saskatchewan Writers Guild, Rowan Neufeld, over there. So glad to have you here, holding it up for poets in that program this time around. So there you go. So I want to say a little bit more about the Standstill and where all this is coming from. As Taidgh was saying, right, there's this Standstill event that happens every 18.6 years. But right now we're in the middle of it. We are at the moon has reached, this month has reached the furthest point north it's going to be every 18.6 years. And of course, this is a slow process. It's about how its orbit moves up and down in relation to the Earth. And what was found so stunning about all this is the fact that I discovered it in Scotland when I was there for a family wedding and wound up in Isle of Lewis. And just to give you an idea of the geography, Glasgow is on the same latitude as Prince Albert, which is in the south of Scotland. The Isle of Lewis and the standing stones of Callanish are at about 58 degrees. In other words, almost at our northern border. That's how far north it is. And it's considered subarctic, except that, of course, they have the ocean currents they don't get the 50 below, but they do just fine on their own, actually. So so I wanted to just mention that. And the way all this happened was when I was over there for that wedding, I wasn't even aware of the Standstill. But it turned out that the standing stones at Callanish were aligned with the Standstill. And what the features there are, there's a row of these glyphs going up the hilltop, side of the hilltop, where there's a circle of stones. And in the background, there's a landform across this body of water. I think it's a peninsula possibly, but it's in the shape of a pregnant woman lying down on her back. And when the moon comes up during the Standstill, it comes up on the end of the Standstill stones, traces the tops of the stones, which are in turn aligned with the shape of the woman lying on the ground. And during the Standstill, the moon, right now the moon, we're in the winter, is the highest point you'll see it in the sky, and the arc of the moon is the widest it'll ever be. In the summer, the moon will appear closer to the Earth than you'll ever see, closer to the horizon than you'll see it at any other time in this whole process. So that was going on, but I only learned about it when I came back to Canada, or I picked up something and started reading about it. And then I discovered there are 2 and perhaps 3 Native American Standstill sites as well. And of course, Native American people around here, we wouldn't use that kind of language, but down in the States, that's what they call themselves. So There you go. But anyway, I was thinking, we're traveling all over Europe. Why aren't we looking outside our own back door to figure this stuff out and see what it is? And at the same time, there's this other question in art, and that's the rise of Indigenous culture in art, which I think is transforming our art in this country in ways we still don't know, because it's still in process. It's still a dynamic process. And so I had this idea, this question of, how is it that the imagination, first of all, travels the stones in Lewis and the 2,000-year-old Hopewell Earthworks that are also aligned with the Standstill, are separated by 2,000 years and an ocean. So how does the imagination get from there to here? And it was a big question that was bothering me for a long time, or not bothering me, but pestering me. And the other question was, how do we write about these places being here in this country at this time? Or how do we find the language? How do we find this common ground we like to talk about? I thought the only way to do was to start doing it. So that was where it's all this stuff is coming from. And I'm a poet and I'm not used to long explanations. So I'm going to try to dive in here. And I'd like to just take you to the Isle of Lewis and the Outer Hebrides of Scotland, which is, the Isle of Lewis is a huge island. I think it's about 2 hours by ferry from Uig on the tip of Skye. Okay, so this is July 2012. Isle of Lewis, Outer Hebrides, Scotland. The prairie creature in me is drawn to the furthest edges of the place. I arrived on Isle of Lewis 2 days ago. I am 3 hours by ferry and bus from Uig on the tip of Skye, and another hour from Stornoway. North Atlantic wind comes in from the sea loch. The heather holds back its bloom. I walk the worn footpath that passes between the standing stones of Callanish. The land is rough like the Canadian Arctic in summer. A mottled skin of soil, terracotta colored lichens, and tough grass that grips the rock where it can. The jet stream is stalled, causing heavy rain and flooding in Scotland and England. This is June, but there are so few people, it feels like the end of a season. The low white fence separates the last houses of Callanish village on one side from the annoyance of tourists on the other, and sheep. I walk the avenue of Nice grey stones set in the earth like pieces of fallen sky. They become taller than me on their way up the crest of the hill, crowned by a circle of glyphs. The main stone is 4.8 meters high and weighs 7 tons. I'm not sure I should touch it, but finally raise my palm to a slight rounded protrusion, only to find that it's warm like flesh, not the indifferent cold I was expecting. Cliff or hillock or cove, stories grow into their places. Their names become bone names with a resonance even a stranger can feel. A headland, Loch Seaforth, also called Erd Lemashadder in Gaelic. Callanish becomes Callanay or Gaelic. Isle of Lewis, Ilan and Frole, Isle of Flowers. A pole like the moon, which is only moon in one language. A not very old one, at that. And I'll just mention the forum I'm using for this thing is Fred Waugh called it Utaniki, but it's a kind of poetic travel journal. And only with mostly modern forms. There's a haiku or two in there, but mostly modern. So I'd like to go from there to the I can get to my page, to the earthworks, the Hopewell Earthworks in Ohio. And these earthworks are 2,000 years old. And the largest, they can include the largest geometric earthworks in the world. There's nothing random about them. And the largest and probably one of the most important pieces of this is what's known as the octagon and circle. The octagon is an earthen circle, 1,000 feet across, over 1,000 feet across, encompassing 20 acres. There's an earthen wall around it, is about as high as this ceiling. And all this earth was moved on this hilltop. If you stand on one end of the circle and look toward the east, you'll see two 500-foot walls, the same height. And at the end of those walls, you'll see the end of an octagon with 8 what are called gates, but were not really gates, but they're where each side of the octagon slopes to the ground, the same height. And it's 3,000 feet from the mound at the end of the circle, through the walls to the end of the octagon. And there's an opening at the end of the octagon. And that's where the standstill moon rises every 18.6 years. I did a calculation on one of these sites, and I calculated that just one of these sites had enough earth in it to fill Mosaic Stadium to ground level. Mosaic Stadium is 10 meters deep, and there'd be enough left over for a decent sized toboggan hill. So that gives you kind of an idea of the scope, and they're so big you can't really take a picture of them because the camera can't capture it all. And even standing there, you can't see it all. A lot of some things you can't see them yourself. So I'm just going to read about one place called the Great Circle, which is I'm about 9 days into my trip there, and wondering if this was a fool's errand because I just took the chance that something would happen from the rain. So I'll just dive right in. The prairie horizon I trusted is gone. My half-finished breakfast wrap sits on the passenger seat. It's been all GPS and directional media since I arrived. I feel I've woken up a great distance from where I went to sleep. I got up early and have driven to Heath, 45 minutes away. That's from Columbus. I turn off the ramp. The post and beam strip malls, an appliance store, and other businesses are casually spread. The real town heart is somewhere else. I nearly missed the low blue sign on Hebron Road that simply says, Great Circle Earthquakes, Greater Licking County. I expected something more to bring in the tourists, but anonymity is a way some places have of saving what's left. The parking lot is empty except for 2 women pulling rain jackets from their car. I look up at the lee slope of a hill sprinkled with tall volunteer trees. The ground between them has been groomed, making it hard to tell where the natural slope becomes the arc of a massive wall, a curving trajectory that disappears into a pewter sky. The circle wall encloses 20 acres. It follows the contours of the hilltop, rising 14 feet in places to make a level horizon of the rim. A carefully groomed channel follows the inside circumference. It used to hold water, perhaps to guide spirits into the circle. The ditch is dry now, giving the illusion that the wall is even higher than it was when it still held the ring of water that would have reflected the sky. The brochure said, a man-built ring, diameter 1,052 feet, circumference 2 feet from perfect. Think eyelid or hinge, not how you got here. Using fire, hand tools, and baskets to move the earth, the Hopewell leveled the hilltop overlooking the Scioto River. After the burn, wild grasses and flowers would have received the rain, just as the seeded grass does now. My shoes are soaked. The entrance is the gap where the 2 ends of the circle slope to the ground, leaving a space which is the only way in to the center. Snatches of white-sided bungalows on Parkview Drive blink over the rim of the far wall. Maybe they're here for the commute to Columbus. Maybe for privacy or a place to run the dog. But there are other parks, and no algorithm to explain what brought them to this particular place and its boundary. I hesitate. A few steps ahead, I'm surprised by a group of 80-foot red maples I couldn't see from the entrance. A fallen main limb has been dragged into the open to be cleared off. The storm that did it must have been recent. I choose a direction and start walking. Last night's rain is not quite turning to steam. A tree has fallen, its skin warm like an elephant's. The still moist cambium where the bark split away, cooler than the gray wrapped limb, as if the sap knew something was up. A tree has fallen. I'm only halfway to the far wall. There's a dark spot at the base. I imagine a pile of field stones, maybe a hearth. All I find is the trunk of a tree sheared flat by a chainsaw, the heartwood turned black by the rot that killed it. A pearl crescent butterfly flashes the small half moons on its wingtips as it catches a bit of heat, a current I can't quite feel. I think of the Hopi butterfly dance painting in the Columbus Museum, questions of figure and ground, and painted, questions of figure and ground, white paint on white paper, except for the black luster of the young girl's hair and painted triangle mask. The maiden has learned the 32 songs of the ceremony. She has no word or time. Her gaze is direct. Butterfly dance, butterfly wing powder. More and more intimate things of the world put in drawers or in rooms dim light to keep them from fading. Something above me yips like a terrier, a harassing squirrel, scolding bird. Eventually the bird flies off, becomes its own silhouette on a short, quick route to another tree, on which a pictogram. Delinquents in love carve. This heart's Trevor. For one heart, undecipherable, and small heart, Renault Lisa Javon proudly indicates for Zach BG, who is taller. But why in 20 acres? 4 lovers, a single tree hard to find for anyone but them. A maple in full autumn color stands by itself, crimson in its own forest. Back home, the only trees like this were in books. I lived on the pine tree line where the spruce grew so thick they blocked out everything but the riverhead of stars above us. The moon came out in its own time. There was no place like this. The red I see here, I can love. Not the legend of a color valorized in rhyming poems in cinder block schools. Still, we love those famous group of 7 painters of the North. Teachers called it our North. Precambrian, scraped, ghost-skinned birches gripped to a stony rock. In the classroom posters, Tom Thompson's Silent Canoe, A.Y. Jackson, Frank Carmichael, and blue-green swirling Emily Carr's Mr. Wu, our favorite monkey, perched on the paint cart, confirming this is the color. The world looks like this. Painters pass. It's the next generation's work to break free of them. But I still love those smoke green veils I saw in my mind. A garden's fall and tangle. Autumn, proclaimed as a freezing rush of a stream past a screen of saplings. Ice and fire. The Carmen wilderness they said was true, really was true. This one color I never got to see until now, 50 years later in another country. So that was from the Hopewell Earthworks section, a daybook, because it was actually written in that period that I was there day by day. And then edited, I have to say, admit. What I want to do is read, skip ahead. There's a section of the book called Little Voices, and it's about people that I've known, and in the introduction to that section, I say enough to fill a village. And this comes from different things happening. My father worked in the mental health field, and I was a kid growing up in these places when kids were still allowed to be around these the staff kids were playing on the lawns and in the background at picnics and invited to things because everybody liked to have them around. And so that was part of my life too. And sometimes the loss of, there were so many people I've known that have lost part or all their speech, sometimes through illness like cancer. My sister has spinal meningitis and became completely deaf, lost 100% of hearing loss when she was young and had to learn to speak. And still, her speech is still not as good as you may have heard with some deaf people. But some things that happened, I'll just mention is my father one day was when he first got a job running the former Prince Albert Training School, went on a tour of all the institutions in the province, the mental hospitals and such. And the highlight was supposed to be going down to the Weyburn Hospital. And, our sister being deaf, he's very attuned to picking things up. And there was an older fellow there that he wanted to go over and speak to. And he was assured, my dad was assured this guy was mute. And he went over to the guy and started talking to him. And this man started answering the questions. He gave his name, how long he'd been there, where he was from. And what happened was during the Regina riot of 1935, when the was Bennett, Ironhill Bennett, the Prime Minister's nickname, told the RCMP to stop these onto Ottawa trekkers there to trying to protest conditions and work plan in the working camps. And this man, when the jails filled up, they put some of these people in the mental hospitals. And 26 years later, this guy was still there. And yeah, there's no reason to know why he decided to start answering those questions. And, there might, psychology in that day would say it's the effect of a new stimulus, or maybe he's just decided to come home at last, so to speak. But anyway, I want to read a little bit about my sister. And my sister grew up going to schools for the deaf, 3 different schools for the deaf. So that meant that I hardly saw her growing up as a child. And there's lots about parents and children's and the children with disabilities and such, but not much about siblings. And so because I'd never had much of a conversation with her, she was in Dartmouth, and she got bacterial pneumonia, and one of the fastest progressing cases they'd ever seen, and wasn't expected to make it. So I went there with one of my sisters from here, and I have another sister down east. And that sister down east, I've called her Jen here, sister from Saskatchewan, Mo, and my deaf sister, I'll call her Anne. And I went down there and I was keeping a journal, and the reason was that so much had been taken away from us that I thought that regardless of what happened, at least that wouldn't be taken away as well. So I started doing the journal, and I think it was there over a period of over 10 days or something like that. So I'll just say this is May the 2nd. And I'll just take you through one day. This is May the 2nd, 2:15 p.m. Rest, hope again. I leave the ICU for a break. I lived in the Maritimes for 10 years. The jobs were precarious, including my time at a Dartmouth Boys and Girls Club, a temporary place run out of a dingy basement of St. Anthony's Church. The public housing across the street was built next to lines from the coal-fired power plant. I liked the kids, and I liked walking along Windmill Road with its glimpses of the grey working harbour. I heard more music played at house parties in my first year in Nova Scotia than I had in my entire life until then. A melange of Cape Breton fiddle tunes, a guitar or piano laying down chords, dark rum, John Prine, spirituals, the Stones, and You are my sunshine more times than I can possibly count. I took drawing classes and finally finished my degree in this clannish, best, and most familiar place. I call Saskatchewan from the deck of the Dartmouth Ferry. No answer. There's a hockey game on TV in the Irish pub on the Halifax side. This is as far as I'll go. Canada 4, Sweden 2. Anne is half an hour away, and I wonder if I'm too far from the hospital if anything happens. Most of the tables are still empty. The waitress says there won't be any deep fried clams until Friday, since this season just started. It used to be called poor man's food, but tourists in souvenir sweaters strolling along the dockside shops at Privateer's Wharf crave it. The rustic fare of what the brochures refer to as authentic sea and shore, as if one can tell what is true and what is not by the taste. And I'll move a little bit further through the day. And so this is 11:20 p.m. And Jen, my sisters, Jen and Mo have gone home. So there's just me and Anne. Jen and Mo have gone home. Just now in the waiting room, I was speaking with Susan, who lives in Lunenburg County. She came in with pains in both arms. The EMTs gave her something she calls bee blockers, which probably saved her life. We talk about the old stores downtown. You need a discount, and laugh like hell. She went to the old La Have school 50 years ago. The same place Jen lived for a while when I was still down east. Susan wonders if I knew a girl named Spearwater from someplace down the road that ended in river. I used to be able to tell where people were from by the way they talked. Bridgewater being different from La Have or Mahone Bay. Susan's married daughter lives in Birmingham, where Susan's married daughter lives in Birmingham, where she has picked up an Alabama accent and writes letters home filled with you-alls. My friend back in Regina thinks I'm from here, maybe because of the way I lay back on my vowels or drop them completely from the first half of a compound word, New Brunswick. It's not as though I've abandoned the language, but it fades deeper into my memory, the way fish swim through stone until their eyes turn dusty and their bones fall to the bottom of the limestone sea. 11:40 p.m. Oxygen reduced to 60%, respiration still at 27. I explain to the new nurse that Anne has almost 100% hearing loss, and we are here so she knows she isn't alone. The nurse replies, my sister will remember none of this. Even people in a coma remember voices. So why not a hand brushing an arm if touch is how we speak? Anne has taught touch sign to deaf people. If we stop, what will happen to the language we make now? The signs forgotten, like the accents of those villages along the South Shore after the children disappear into gated communities down in the States, or they fly to the prairies like me. Even now, as I think of this, I can see how this place took me into itself and became part of my restlessness. I'm taking a chance, turning the reading lamp on so I can see the page. Anne's heart rate increases when they adjust the tubes or wash her. Her breathing gets shallow and her oxygen drops. She knows things are happening. Perhaps she knows this light is my light. My left hand holds hers as I write, balancing the pad precariously on my knee, as if the letters could travel up my arm, across my shoulders, and down again, finding my fingers barely more than a whisper at the edge of my skin. On behalf of the sleeper, I would like to say, the fish is aware of the sea. And I think I'd like to conclude with one last piece. I have a section in here called Song of the Lark, which is literally about art that saves lives. And I think we can all think of individual cases where you go on YouTube and you'll see, I know there's one singer, musician, Tash Sultana, that I mentioned in here. And there's sort of one story of recovery after another that followed that. And so I became really interested in what is this all about? And it's not like you can exactly explain it, but I'll just say that one thing we know is that the word empathy did not exist until early in the last century, about 1910s or so. And it came out of art. And the father of psychology, I forget his name, was a German. And it was when Rodin and Rilke, the poet, got together. And that was the beginning of basically Rilke being one of the well-known existentialists. I don't know if he would have called himself that, but that's what he's been classified as. But anyways, I was interested in that whole question of art, starting to document actual cases where a life was saved. And so this is what got me started, though, in the beginning of all this. And I'll just dive in. And so this is set in Calistoga, California, about maybe 2003-ish, somewhere in that ballpark. And I'm still in my early days. So it says, in my early days as a poet imbued with the naive ambition of most new writers, I signed up for the Napa Valley Writers Conference in St. Helena, California. The conference was actually a workshop led by some rising and quite famous American writers, Ron Carlson, Mark Doty, Brenda Hillman, Nick Flynn, and others. I was looking for a taste of American writing culture and how different it must be from the one I knew. It was the deep end of the pool, and part of me wanted to know if my own work could make any kind of impression at all. The faculty readings were held at the Napa Valley wineries, including a grand Spanish-style winery that could easily have held 500 people under the high arches of the hacienda-style reception room. American writers are great readers of their own work. Unlike the poor cousins of British literature here in the colonies, there is nothing deferential in the way they present their work. Something that is a shift that has finally started to take hold in Canada. The highlight of my US adventure came from Chick Harity and Yvonne Henry, the couple I was billeted with. They lived on the outskirts of Calistoga, a town 8 miles from the conference. Chick and Yvonne were both photographers. Chick was a retired Associated Press photographer and had a small studio that was hardly more than a shed set in the half shade of the Ponderosa pines behind the house. One afternoon, he invited me into his studio and brought out a 3-ring binder filled with his AP photographs slipped into archival sleeves. He began flipping through a remarkable set of photographs from the days when he had close access to US presidents in a way that would be unimaginable today. As a White House photographer, he covered every president from John F. Kennedy to Bill Clinton. There was a photo of JFK with his family on a balcony 2 weeks before the assassination. Chick paused at a close-up of Martin Luther King before speaking into a row of microphones before the March on Washington, and an eye-level photograph of Gerald Ford swimming directly into the lens of the camera as he does laps in the White House pool. Then came the iconic image of Richard Milhous Nixon with his face contorted in a way that can't be unseen. This may be the photograph that a former White House staffer said they hid from the president for a week until he lost his temper and demanded to see it, and he did promptly explode. And some people might know this photograph as the Tricky Dicky photograph. If you just Google it, as they say, and you'll remember. So anyway, there's other good photographs there, but we finally came to the photograph that stirred the country. Chuck was in Saigon in 1973 covering the Vietnam War. He was on his way to a briefing with some generals when he spotted a young boy curled up on the sidewalk next to a box that held his baby sister. Chick said the driver was probably Viet Cong and was as anxious to get to the briefing as he was and didn't want to stop. But Harry made him pull over anyway and took the shot. The photo went out over the wire. It became one of the most memorable images from Vietnam. When Baby in the Box appeared in the US press, people wanted to know who she was and what happened to her. Search began, and Chick guessed it must have been the Viet Cong who actually found her, which is how things worked in those days. It turned out she had a heart murmur. When people found out, they sent money to send her to the States where she had the operation that saved her life. An American family adopted her. Years later, Nahani, the child in the photograph, presented Harry with a Lifetime Achievement Award for the White House News Photographers Association. The world has been moved by photographs before, and this one sticks. As Chick finishes turning the pages, he says to me, and said it just like this, "Well, I guess this is my so-called career." His voice stayed low. We let the conversation pass for a bit. What I remember most is how he seemed to be still working through the memory of that box that could barely hold the child sleeping inside it, and what it still weighed. Surely a story like this leaves its mark on the one doing the saving. Not a scar exactly, but a measure of who a person is in that moment. The kind of thing one speaks about quietly 30 years later, as if it happened to someone else. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. Nice to be able to read this.
So I'm going to ask Bruce a few questions and then I'll open it up to you after. So. Well, thank you, Bruce, for the lovely readings. You have 6 books of poetry. Why a collection of essays?
I did it for the money. No, actually what it is, there is a generosity to prose, and with poetry, may do just as much research as you would do for any other fiction or nonfiction book. But the fact is that you really don't have the latitude to really go. There's a generosity to prose, and there's no way I could have expressed all that. I could have maybe written more about myself going through all that, but poetry has a prose has a scope to it that just is more. There's more patience to it, I think, and I know it from the responses I've had. There seem to be people are longer in the responses to it, like it's an extended experience, I guess, is what seems to work for these things.
And in Little Voices, the first short essay, you talk about some of the people in your village, that they have no voice or they're silenced, but they have a presence. And when I was reading the first part, you talk about the standing stones on the island of Lewis, and you talk about touching the rock and it feeling warm. And I felt there was a connection with this presence that with nature and with people that's throughout the book. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I've been sort of thinking about that aspect of it, and in both cases, whether it's looking at nature, it's still about being is about attention, as about attention to the place where you are, or actually, there's no question of a sense of the presence of these people, even though they may have lost their speech. You also have a sense of this environment, and I think there is a connection to them, but also often you share that same environment with them, and so there's this level of shared experience that really is quite powerful as well. So it's I guess a different kind of attention, but it's still, I guess it's maybe a bit of a continuum or two things happening at the same time.
Mhm. And I have a question about journals. Did you think about writing in that journal form and to create a book out of it, or were you just writing the journal without intentionally writing towards a book?
Well, I didn't know where that trip to Ohio was going to lead, but I knew I was going to journal because I wasn't sure the writing was going to go anywhere at all. And so poetry at that point was my more natural medium, I guess. And so I still go to it for some things, but it was a conscious decision that I was going to journal. So even if nothing happened with it, I would have that record, the same as at my sister's bedside.
Mhm.
And when I travel, actually, I do sometimes journal because it's a different kind of experience. So it's a kind of a conscious decision. And some of the other things, in some cases, there would be a poem. There was poetry written about some of those subjects that I'd written before. Like I'd written about my sister in poetry as well,
Mhm.
as long that journal at her bedside. So what it does is it provides a route in, it provides a way in when it happens when the poetry comes first. But the two are, I think, it's a way of finding that sort of level of experience, is what the poetry does for me.
Great. Thanks for answering my questions. I have more questions, but I want to open it up. Does anyone have any questions here or online? No? No takers. See if I can think of another one. Last chance for a question.
Maybe you might like to hear about something that I had an interesting experience, with, I'll just, there's more about it in the book, but I did everything with the Hopewell Earthworks to do it in the right way, given all the considerations in Canada. Down in the States, I'm not sure that basically Indigenous artists just feel often almost invisible. But anyway, there's a lot of expectations in terms of how we do this writing. But the interesting thing to me was when I was writing about Little Voices and also the piece about my sister, was that the same rules apply. And my sister and I had seen so little of each other. I'm not fluent in ASL at all. But in order to talk to her about that experience and what I was doing, I had to hire a sign interpreter. So what I found was it was an interesting experience for me because actually the same requirements that in both, how exactly what you do varies, but it's the same kind of requirements when you're dealing with somebody from another background or other experience. And it was really interesting to go through that. And plus my sister had some stories that that should not be shared. So.
I think that's very good. Well, I want to thank you so much for inviting me to host your book launch. I really enjoyed your book, and there's lots of interesting essays that I think can appeal to lots of different people, or different interests. I did really like the first part. I really could kind of see that. Perhaps that's because I'm a poet too, and I like the poetry that you still kept in there. So I really appreciate your book. Thank you so much for coming, and all the way from Prince Albert today, was it?
Yep.
Yeah,
Today, yeah.
yeah.
Well, thanks, and thanks everybody for coming, and again, thanks to McNally Robinson for doing this. This is really important to the writing community to have this here, and I think for people to hear a live poet as opposed to only dead poets. So thanks, everybody.
And we can purchase the book here and get it signed as well. Thank you to Jasper for hosting this event as well. Thank you all for coming tonight, and I hope you get home safely. Thank you.